I just check, Ashley, are we live and can I begin?
Yeah, we are live. People are slowly appearing. I think we've got 18 attendees now and they just sort of come in ones and twos.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special webinar on the Interfaith Buddies scheme, which is a scheme that the Interfaith Network developed, I suppose, 2 or 3 years ago, and Interfaith Scotland has also been pioneering, and we're really looking forward to sharing with you today some excellent contributions about how people have been using that. We have participants joining us today from different nations of the UK, from different types of group. Welcome to everybody. And I'll just start with 1 or 2 bits of housekeeping, if I may. The webinar is being recorded, and it's planned that a recording will be put on the IFN website. You won't be recorded unless you raise your hand to ask a question. If you'd like to ask a question after any of the presentations, but you don't want to be in the final recording, just type your question into the Q&A or let us know, and so that we can then edit you out of the recording. Only the hosts and the panelists are on screen by default, but we can bring you in as an attendee if you'd like to speak or raise a question. And the raise hand button, now for those of you who perhaps like me sometimes wrestle with where that raise hand is, in this particular type of webinar, the button's in a different place from usual Zoom meetings. If you look along your main toolbar at the bottom, you'll be able to find it alongside Q&A, etc. Is that right? My colleague Ashley will nod or not. Yes, that's all good. The chat is only functioning for panelists, and they can use it to send chats to everybody, for example, to share web links relevant to their presentation. But if you're attending as a general attender, you don't have a reply function. So instead, we welcome your using the Q&A function if you want to ask presenters or hosts a question, and all panelists and hosts can see questions. But as chair, I'll usually draw attention to particular questions at the appropriate points in the agenda with the assistance of one of my colleagues who are with me today, who are Ashley Beck, Project Director at IFN, and Alid Vernon-Rees, Project Assistant. So welcome again to this meeting. And I notice, actually, thank you, Ashley, you've just popped those housekeeping matters into the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to reiterate the very warm welcome to you all, thank our excellent speakers who are going to be presenting today, and invite my colleague Alid Vernon-Rees to give a short introduction, very briefly, to say something about the Interfaith Buddies scheme, what it is, and how might you use it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the webinar. So as Harriet said, I'm just going to provide some brief introductory words about the Interfaith Buddies scheme, what it is and how you might use it. So what is the Interfaith Buddies scheme? It's a scheme which brings together individuals to engage in dialogue and discussion. It's a scheme where 2 people of different faiths or of a particular faith and of a non-religious belief will keep in touch on a weekly basis for around 6 weeks. This can be carried out in person or online as agreed by the participants. It's an opportunity for sharing and learning on a one-to-one basis across a limited period of time about what is important to us in the context of our wider community. In the scheme, participants can choose or develop questions on which to share their thoughts and experiences. For example, they can ask questions about how their faith or non-religious belief shapes their lives, their approach to particular issues, such as social justice, the environment and education, and how their faith or non-religious belief encourages services to others in society. So it's an open process between the 2 parties involved. Participants can agree their expectations about the frequency, medium, or duration of the contact. They can set the boundaries for the discussion, and they can talk about expectations and what they expect to receive from the process. And the process may also naturally lead to longer term conversations, collaborations, and new forms of practical cooperation. So how might you use the scheme? There are many ways that the scheme may be used, and it can be adapted as necessary by organisations to suit their own context. So, for example, it could be used in a workplace setting to help staff understand the beliefs of their other colleagues. Two different organisations, be that a faith and belief organisation, interfaith organisation, workplace, could work together to match up buddies from each organisation to increase the understanding of the other beliefs between the two organisations. And it's also been used in educational institutions, such as schools and universities, as a way for pupils and students to engage in interfaith dialogue and learn more about each other. And it is also used as a way to mark Interfaith Week. So during this year's week, for example, Humanist UK set up Interfaith Buddy Dialogues, and that is a relationship which is going to be spoken about later in the webinar today. And Goldsmiths Multi-Faith Chaplaincy at the university also hosted Interfaith Buddy Scheme as part of their activities for the week. So how would you set up the scheme? So if your organisation is interested in taking up the idea, it could be a way you can designate a person in the organisation to lead on the scheme. They can then share information about the Interfaith Buddy Scheme with their members, invite interested participants to be in touch, and ask them if there's any particular faith or belief background from which they'd be interested in having an interfaith buddy. So once they've secured permission and shared the contact details, so the email address or phone number, then they can start matching up buddies within the organisation. So that's the basic information about the scheme. I'm going to put a link in the chat now, which links to our website's page about the scheme. So hopefully everyone should be able to see that now. So the link also points to some good resources that we have. For example, our code leaflet on building good relations with people of different faiths and beliefs, and our resource on interfaith dialogue, which is called Let's Talk, Practical Pointers for Interfaith Dialogue. So yeah, that's a basic rundown of the scheme. And then over the course of the webinar today, you'll hear some case studies and examples of how individuals have used this within their organizations.
Thank you so much, Alid. And you are marvelously on time. And I think we have room for one question. If anybody would like to raise one for Alid, do we have any questions in the chat or people who'd like to raise a hand? I don't see any. Is that right? No. In that case, am I correct, Ashley? You're in invisible mode at the moment.
Yeah, there don't seem to be any hands raised or Q&As.
Then thank you so much, Alid. Alid is working on reporting on Interfaith Week and has taken a particular interest in this dialogue scheme. Great to have that introduction. So we now move on to
Harriet, you do now have a hand from somebody called Mona.
Right, Mona, you will have a very brief slot for a question. Mona, do you want to be highlighted? Yes, here we go. Yes, Mona, your question?
Thank you, Harriet. Sorry, just to say that my chat is disabled. I don't know if anybody else, I tried to put a question in there, but it didn't come up. So it's saying chat disabled. So maybe somebody who's set this up needs to just enable it.
Yeah, the chat is intentionally disabled, Mona, but you can pop questions in using the Q&A button instead.
Oh, okay.
My fault for bad description. Apologies.
That's okay. No, that's fine. While I'm here, can I ask my question then rather than put it in there?
Yes, please do.
Just very quickly to ask Alid, the people that you're buddied up with, would that be sort of local to you, or because you can do it online, would it be national, international even?
So I think it basically depends how your organization wants to use the scheme. So if it's a school or a university, then it makes sense for it to be a local thing if it's inside the same organization, but it can be used online to reach across people across the country. So it's completely open, and it's up to those involved to decide how best they want to use the scheme and if they choose online or in person.
Thank you, Alan. In other words, the world is your dialogue oyster. It's just a matter of making the logistical things work.
Okay.
So we now move on to benefits of using the scheme in local interfaith contexts. And we're delighted to welcome Kautha Hashmi from Surrey Faith Links. She wears a number of different interfaith hats, but I think that's the one today. Over to you.
Thank you, Harriet. And yes, I'll just start with a brief introduction. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. I don't usually use Zoom on my mobile, but I've got another meeting to join, so I'm in the car at the moment.
You're audible. You're fine. Yes.
All right. So yeah, I work for a small charity organisation called Surrey Minority Ethnic Forum, and I deliver a project called Surrey Faith Links. And part of that work is engaging with interfaith dialogue. So I work with 6 interfaith forums across the county. And in 2020, when it was the lockdown, the whole pandemic was happening, we had to get a bit creative, and I was grateful to receive the information from Interfaith Network UK about the Interfaith Buddy scheme, and I thought, this is a good idea, let's explore it. So I sent out an email to all of the local interfaith forums, and I said, if you know anyone who'd be interested, I'm happy to administrate it, because usually that is what takes the toll on people, having to do all the admin around it and connect people. So I passed on the information to local interfaith forums, but also some of my faith contacts throughout the county. And the take-up wasn't too great, to be honest. I had about 14 people, which were paired up in twos. So 7 couples of people who did that. And it was quite interesting, actually. A lot of the people who wanted to be buddies hadn't previously got involved with interfaith activity in the sense of an organized activity through the interfaith forums, which I found interesting. To me, that sent a message. Maybe there's people out there who are not the type who want to attend an event and take part in that kind of thing, but just on a one-to-one level, want to connect with people of different faiths. So that was interesting. And so through my work, I was able to connect people. I remember sending an email to Interfaith Network UK asking if there was any guidelines around this. What should I be telling people and advising them of? So I remember there was some guidance produced, and I sent that across to the buddies so that they could, mutually agree on how they wanted to meet. And there was a question from someone about if they had to meet locally. So because we were countywide, and at that time it was a lockdown, so we couldn't meet. Actually, at that time you could meet outdoors when we did the scheme. But a lot of the people actually met virtually, and I recorded, because I wanted to showcase some of this work to encourage other people to do this. I did an interview with 2 of the people who buddied up, and that's available on YouTube as well, and I'll hopefully we'll be able to show a little bit of that clip in a minute. But just to explain that, those people who you'll see on the YouTube clip actually communicated via email to begin with, and then later on went on walks together to get to know each other better. And so I think the other challenge was when I sent out the message, people were quite specific. They wanted to meet a Sikh or a Muslim, and then I had to look at how do I match these across. So there's the practical side of things as well. But some people were quite open. They were like, I'm happy to talk to anyone of a different faith. I'm just interested in spirituality. So that was easy, but it was difficult when they were quite specific, and I didn't have somebody from that faith, and it was a bit of a challenge. I had to go back and say, well, I don't have that. However, would you be willing to explore this faith? And then had to kind of do that. So if it's okay with you now, I'd like to show a clip. I think David is going to help with the sharing of the screen. Harriet, you're on mute.
I think it might be Ashley who's
sorry, Ashley. Yeah, sorry.
And there we go.
There's no volume. There's no sound, I think.
Ashley, there's no volume on this.
Okay, apologies. Let me just change the setting.
So I can share, I think I have shared the link already in the chat. I can send it again. So if anybody's interested, it's just a 10-minute clip, and I ask questions.
Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Peace begins at sort of the individual level, and it's important to know your neighbour and understand what's going on in your neighbour's community. The interfaith budding system seemed a great way to do that. It's also a good opportunity to meet somebody new in the middle of the pandemic. So I sort of see it as a scheme where I can learn more and listen and learn more about a different faith, a different community.
Yeah, I suppose the lockdown, one of the advantages of the lockdown was people are going to Zoom, and it's easier to reach out to people. You guys are from one person, you're from Godalming, and Annabelle's from Hazelmere, so it might have been quite difficult for you to buddy up. So technology, thank God, has helped you to kind of come together. So Annabelle, what about you? Why did you want to be an interfaith buddy?
I just thought it would be really interesting to meet somebody from a different faith, and I was really pleased to meet Debbie, as I've never met anybody who was a friend in one of the Quakers before. So yeah, it's been really fun. You don't, in Hazelmere, it's not exactly the most diverse of areas, so you don't really come across many people of different faith. So yeah, I thought it would be a really good
I think that's enough. Thank you, Ashley.
Experience.
So if you are interested and you want to hear the full interview, there's a YouTube link in the chat. We can send it again if you haven't received it. And that should give you a slight insight as to, as Annabelle mentioned, she lives in an area where there's not much diversity. She doesn't get the opportunity to engage with people of other faiths. So this scheme really opened that opportunity for her. And, so this could be a national, even an international thing, depending on what you want to do. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to take on this scheme further. Is something that I hope to do. I also work as a chaplain for Syrian Borders Partnership, and I'm hoping to do something with staff there, because there's increased interest in diversity and getting to know each other's faiths and beliefs through the spirituality and staff network. So I'm hoping, let's see, in the summer to set something up in preparation for the 6 weeks ahead of Interfaith Week. So you'll hear more probably about that through Interfaith Network.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. This gives us a real insight into how the buddy scheme can help in places often where people have not been in connection before, and also into some of the one or two of the challenges logistically. But the positive side comes through very strongly. May I open, are you happy to answer one or two questions? I know you're heading to another meeting, and thank you for fitting this in today. Can I open the electronic floor then, if people have any questions they'd like to ask to Kautha about the Surrey experience? I don't see raised hands, is that?
One's just come up now from Timothy Tofts.
And when people make their question, could they say which organisation they're from, if they're from one? Timothy, your question. I think you're from the Southampton Community of Faiths. Is that right? You're muted, Timothy. Those infamous Zoom words.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yes, I work in Southampton, in the Southampton Community of Faith, which is a well-established, 20-year well-established interfaith network that we have here. And I'm also doing a buddy system with a humanist in Winchester, which is progressing very well, and we're actually finding out there's very little we disagree on, apart from the existence of a deity, which we haven't really got round to. But I just wondered if any of you have got any advice on things which we should avoid, where things might go wrong in such a buddy system. Are there areas that are best not touched on, or
well, I think, Timothy, this question is to Kautha particularly at the moment, and I think other people will bear your question in mind as they're presenting. That's a really helpful question to have raised at this juncture. Can I put it to you, Kautha, to respond, and also other speakers, please, to keep that in mind as a question when they're doing their presentations. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a concern for me, because it was something I hadn't dwelled into before, and being familiar with how things can get within the faith context. I set up some guidance with the help of Interfaith Network UK, and that stipulated things like not to offend and be aware of these things and be open-minded. Most people who do engage in this kind of thing are fairly open-minded, and so I think once you set that tone and send those guidelines, it's okay, and they could always just, if they feel uncomfortable at any stage, they can just leave. They don't need to continue to take part. But I think it's about having open dialogue, being open-minded, and engaging. I think as long as you're clear on that, you're kind of in the safe zone. But I didn't really specify any areas that people couldn't speak about. You know, it's freedom of speech after all.
Does that help, Timothy? Sorry, you're muted again, Timothy.
I think that's probably one of the problems with the conversation I'm having with this particular humanist,
Okay.
that are so open-minded that it's
Let's
areas are not being touched on. But anyway, please, yes.
we're coming to the humanist dialogue later, and your input's fascinating on this. I think what we'll do is perhaps reserve that till a little later. But has that response to your question been helpful? Did it?
Yes, I'm very interested to hear what other people might say later on, but that's a start.
Well,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that helpful question. And we had one other hand up, is that right?
Yes, you've got one hand up, and there's also one in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, let's take a Q&A one first, and then the hand. So I think we have Satnam Singh Poonian. Who will be the best person to contact if we want to set up the scheme in our organisation? Do you have any wisdom to offer on that, Kautha?
Who's the best person to contact for, sorry, if they want to set
up a scheme? I mean, that may be a more general question and answerable from an IFN point of view. We advise, we say that in different organisations, it may be somebody quite different. Surrey, it was yourself who generated the scheme in the first place. Others of you will be talking a little about the logistics. Maureen, when she speaks at the end of the webinar, will be talking about how Scotland handled it. So we won't preempt that at this stage. But if there is an interfaith group and there is a person there, you can use them as the contact point. Did you want to add anything to that, Kautha?
No, I think it's not that difficult to do, really, and there's a lot of guidelines around it, so it's fairly easy to set up. I think anybody can really do that.
Okay, Alid, can I just bring you back in briefly if you're still there? I think you're invisible at the moment. Is there anything you would add from the point of view of IFN and running the scheme about who you contact and how you do it?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, the advice we offer, we can always offer advice. If you contact our email address, we can again kind of point you towards our resources and offer any advice for the scheme. But yeah, within your own organization, it's good to have kind of a main point of contact who can facilitate it. But yeah. Thank
you. And as we'll be hearing shortly, for example, Cornwall Faith Forum has just such a person, and a number do. Moving on to the other raised hand, which is
so Leo Neto's put his hand down. I don't know if perhaps he could put it up again if he does want to come in. Yeah, okay. Leo, you should be able to unmute and speak now.
Okay, thank you very much, friends. Greetings to all. From the Methodist Church, the Interfaith Officer here. We are a member of the Interfaith Network. The question was related to the previous question. That was my doubt if I should speak, because we could raise some people interested in participating in the scheme from the Methodist side, but we would need some help in finding people from a different faith to engage in that conversation, or seeking to see if there was some help in that sense. But Harriet spoke about perhaps we could contact through the interfaith groups that we might have. But I don't know if there's something targeted to budding. We could raise the Methodists, if you know what I mean. I'm sorry.
I think we're always happy to help from the IFN office, so please feel free to be in touch. I think we'll pick this up again at the end, but if it's a national dialogue, we're very happy to be in touch, as we've been with the humanists and I think a couple of others. At the local level, I think, as we've just been hearing from the Surrey example, people are very well equipped where there is an officer or somebody who's working on this to do that. So thank you for that, Liao. And I'll just come back finally to Kautha just before we move on to Cornwall, to say thank you very much for your interesting input. Are you happy to be contacted by people who would like to know more or to be in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Happy to help.
Thank you so much. And we wish...
Harriet, just before you say goodbye, one of the messages in the Q&A was for Kautha specifically, said, would she be willing to share the guidance that she prepared for participants in her buddy scheme?
Yeah, I think it is on the Interfaith Network website. So maybe Ashley or Harriet, we could share that. And I'll have a look to see if I had any additional information, which I'm happy to share as well.
Thank you very much indeed. You can indeed find the material on our website. Aled, if the link wasn't already shared earlier, if you could pop that in or pop it in again. Hope your next meeting goes well, and thank you for joining us in a very orderly way on the electronic hoof.
Yeah, I think it's the
Right.
first time we saw a Zoom meeting in a Zoom meeting.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you so much. And we're now going to travel on to Cornwall to Rita, and make sure it's Jeremy and Eve. And I think Rita, Rita Stephen is the officer at the Cornwall Faith Forum. I think he's going to introduce this next case study, this living case study. Over to you.
Yes, good. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And I want to send greetings from Cornwall, where we woke up to a beautiful layer of lovely snow this morning. So Cornwall Faith Forum brings together people of all faith communities in Cornwall for the benefits of peace. And we chose the body scheme in 2020 for our Interfaith Week activity. And of course, thinking back, it was in the middle of the pandemic. And so it was a wonderful way to be able to share. We thought it was a perfect opportunity during those days. So we asked members to sign up to the scheme. Then we had a meeting to explain the ethics of it. And just to say to everyone that information written by the Interfaith Network was very comprehensive. So we used their guidance, and we then connected people together. And like Kofra was just saying, because we asked people to express who they wanted to speak to, it was sometimes quite difficult to provide the person of the faith that they really wanted. And everyone chose then their preferred way of communication. It was either phone calls, Zoom, or also walks, because at that time we could walk outside. And I personally shared with my friend from the Muslim community, Ulfat, we went for a long walk, which was very wonderful. We had 12 people participating, and we had a whole range of people. People had never met each other before, and people have known each other for years. And an example of this was we had an elderly member of the Muslim community speaking first by email, then by phone calls to an elderly member of the Jewish community who wasn't able to leave her house anymore. And that carried on after Interfaith Week 2020 weekly for a very long time. So they found it extraordinarily helpful to be able to speak to each other about faith, but also to connect to someone when they were housebound. And I'm delighted that Eve is able to be with us today, because he's in the middle of working very hard. And Eve is one of our pagan representatives and one of our trustees. And also Jeremy, who is one of our Jewish representatives and the chair of Kehilat Kerno, the Jewish community in Cornwall. And I'm very delighted that they are happy to share their experience of being on the scheme. And the only thing to say, after we done the scheme, we had a meeting on Zoom all together in the Faith Forum to share our experiences, which was very lovely. So I'm just going to hand over to Eve and Jeremy. Thank you very much.
I don't know if, well, I was about to say, I don't know if Eve wants to go first, but by stepping in like that, perhaps I'll say something to begin with. I was particularly happy to speak to Eve because I knew, I think probably paganism was one of the faiths that I knew the least about. I mean, I knew quite a lot about ancient paganism, as it would have been practiced, let's say, in ancient Rome and Greece. And I also knew quite a lot about ancient Celtic paganism, because I'd actually studied the history of Wales and Cornwall and Scotland before the Roman conquest, but I knew nothing about modern paganism. So I actually learned an awful lot. One of the lessons underneath what I learned actually about paganism itself is that the theology doesn't actually matter so much as the practice. For instance, I discovered that the conception of the divine in paganism is different from the conception that we have in Judaism, in that in Judaism, the divine is outside nature. whereas in paganism, my understanding is that the divine is within nature. It doesn't mean that in Judaism, we don't think of nature as partaking of the divine, but the divine power is something which is outside. But even I discovered that our understanding of how to behave in the world, our belief in how we should behave towards other human beings and towards the world, were in fact actually very, very simple. Sorry, not simple, very, very similar. And I think that's a very valuable lesson, that, as I say, it's not so much what our theoretical conception of the divine and of faith is. What matters is how we put that into practice in our own behavior within the world. Something that I would like to raise, which Rita will probably groan when she hears me say this, because I'm always raising this, is that one of the problems of an awful lot of what we do within the Faith Forum is that we're preaching to the converted. I don't mean the converted to our faith, but we're preaching to the converted in the way that we view our relationship with people, even including people outside our faith. And so we are already well disposed to understanding one another. But I think one of the things that organizations like the Faith Forum need to address is, how do we relate to people who don't have a natural empathy towards people of other beliefs or who have other identities, other races, and it's so that's one thing. And a related point that I'd make is that this is actually refers back to the question asked by Timothy about avoiding certain topics. One of the things that we've done in the Cornwall Faith Forum, it wasn't within the buddy scheme, but was that we actually addressed the topic of conflict. And I actually think that it's something that we should address, even though it can be very difficult, because there may be certain situations, for instance, in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, but we can't shut our eyes to it. And although it may be that my views might be very different from somebody else's views, the only way that there is going to be some kind of resolution, long-term resolution of this kind of conflict, is if we try to understand other people's points of view. And if people like us cannot understand one another's views, then how do we expect people on the so-called front line to do so? So I don't know whether this is something that could be addressed within the buddy scheme, that is trying to actually buddy people up who, I mean, there have to be certain rules of engagement, but to buddy people up who perhaps there are areas which are difficult, or to get them to...
Forgive me, Jeremy, may I just intervene at this point? Just, I'm keeping an eye on the time, but you've raised an enormously important question. And I think this takes us into the area of another piece of work that IFN have been doing, which is looking at difficult dialogues. And I think this is a very key thing to pick up, but it almost needs a whole item of its own, I think, to do justice to that really significant question.
Could I then just raise one?
Yes,
just very quickly, and then I'll hand over to Eve. Is that the buddy scheme as we practiced it here was that it was basically two individuals together. I wonder whether it might be worth considering having some situations where you have two people talking to each other, but there's actually an audience. So I'll leave it there and hand over to...
Thank you for that thought. As we have an audience at the moment, that's a very good kind of context for that. Thank you so much. And I think you're moving on now to hear Eve's reflections on her experience. Thank you.
Yes, so hopefully I won't quite... Hang on a minute, let me I am unmuted, that's fine. Won't put the cat among the pigeons perhaps quite as much as Jeremy did, but yes, it's an immensely positive experience, because it gives you that freedom to ask those questions of people of other faiths that maybe you wouldn't ask in a more public setting, which is why I think maybe a conversation between two in front of an audience might work, but you need very confident people. Jeremy and I have worked together for many years on the Cornwall Faith Forum, so it wasn't a case of people who didn't know each other. But as part of our work in the Faith Forum, obviously I'd be doing workshops on paganism and Jeremy would be doing workshops on things on Judaism, and we never got to hear each other. So it was that permission to explore and ask all those questions that you're always a bit worried about asking in a more public. So, for example, I have learnt that there is a rule in Judaism about how military latrines are dug. You can see that we were able to have massively in-depth conversations, very far-ranging conversations. But I do pick up Jeremy's point of the fact that we are preaching to the converted here, and whether this would be a safe space, or a safer space, a safer way forward for people who might want to learn more, but don't want to dive straight into anything a bit more complex. I would really like to repeat it again. I think it strengthened the Cornwall Faith Forum. It was a very valuable thing to grow our group and to help our group forward. And I think in itself, that was a valuable experience. And I'd like to try it more. And particularly, I mean, this happened during COVID. So as Richard's already touched on, we could go for walks together, we couldn't meet together. But going forward, it's a truly inclusive way of doing things across age and disability barriers, distance barriers, transport barriers. It's a truly inclusive thing, and I think could be used a lot more widely, rather than we put on meetings obviously in person, and they're lovely. It's a lovely way to network and meet new people, but for some people that's always going to be slightly excluding. So yeah, I'd just like to say I think it worked really well on the inclusive feature, and it would be just lovely to repeat it. It would be lovely to repeat it. I mean, I couldn't pick who I wanted to talk to because I want to talk to people of all faiths.
Thank you so much to all three presenters, and please forgive me moving things on at a faster clip than normal life permits. It's we have a fairly tight timetable, but in those contributions some really important possibilities have been raised, particularly Jeremy and Eve, where you've talked about different usages that might be made of it. So thank you so much for those thoughts. Are you both happy to answer one question each? We've got time for one question each. Yes, you are. So I think somebody with a I don't know who CCS is. Would CCS like to reveal their true self and put their question, either come online, become visible, or put it into the Q&A?
Yes, I don't know why I'm not visible. Can you hear me?
Is this
Somerset Diverse Communities? It's Janine Evans, the Interfaith Belief Coordinator for Somerset Diverse Communities.
Good afternoon.
I'm not sure why I'm not visible. I don't have any. Yes, I'm here.
Ask your question. It's
I will.
all good. You have a nice logo.
Okay. I have worked as a Muslim in interfaith since 2001 in Australia, and now in Somerset. And I just wanted to make a comment, but also quickly ask Jeremy and Eve if they have had this experience as well. As a Muslim, and certainly around the time of 9/11, we found it easier to broach the difficult subjects ourselves by talking about terrorism or, Afghanistan or whatever. And I'm just wondering, from your perspectives of being from the Jewish and pagan community, if you've actually found that as well by broaching the difficult subjects.
Thank you so much. 30 seconds each, Eve and Jeremy. Rita, I'm going to give you a pass on this one, if that's okay. Rita has much knowledge on all fronts, but on this one, Eve and then Jeremy, 30 seconds each.
Okay, I think, yes, I have had some experience of this as a pagan. I think the way that we dealt with it in the Cornwall Faith Forum was extremely helpful. We looked at generically how we deal with conflict. It was people came from their same safe space and were able to deal with it in that sort of, we put it out the front. It's not a personal thing. We are dealing with it as a concept. And I have found it helpful as a pagan, yes. Fantastic. Jeremy?
I'm not exactly sure if I'm answering the question, but thinking back to the Christchurch bombings, that when they took place, the Islamic community here organised an event which was attended by members of the faith forums, including ours. And I remember being invited to make a speech. And sometimes there are these moments of terrible tragedy and terrible hatred, which can bring communities together.
Thank you. I think there are moments when dialogue becomes suddenly both an imperative and more possible, and then they're unexpected ones. Rita, there is time for you to add something if you'd like briefly.
Well, actually, can I just speak to the Christchurch mosque bombings a moment? Since Jeremy raised it, I'm actually from Christchurch, and I returned there for the first anniversary. And I have to tell you that the commemoration service, members of all faith, it was like one happy family together. I have to say it was amazing. Okay, and Rita, just briefly, did you have anything to add? Thank you so much for adding that, Eve.
No, I'm just very pleased to hear. Unmute.
Your audio's disappearing, Rita. I think we're going to have to move to the next question.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Was there one other question that somebody wanted to raise very briefly?
Harriet, there's one in the Q&A.
Which is, is there any guidance? This is from Jeremy Riddell of Humanist UK. Is there any guidance on how to address the problem Jeremy Jacobson raised about engagement with people, open brackets, the vast majority, close brackets, outside the usual suspects of liberally minded people who already have a link into the interfaith world? Disinterest seems to be the primary barrier. There is guidance. We can come back to this later. I think that's a broader question. We can pick that up. Ashley, would you be kind enough to actually carry that question across to the end of today's webinar? Because I think that's a broader and very important question.
Yeah.
We are more or less on time, but running, I think, 3 minutes behind. I thank everybody for both being interesting, informative, and keeping to time. And we are now going to move on from Cornwall, but not before I've thanked you all most warmly for such an interesting and really helpful combined input. Thank you again. So we now move on to, sorry, Rita, are you happy for people to contact you at your Cornwall email address if they'd like to be in touch to learn more?
Yes.
You are.
Very happy.
Thank you so much. We now come on to religious, non-religious dialogues, humanist faith buddy dialogues. And we welcome very warmly Yogesh Joshi, who's the Vice Chair of Watford Interfaith Association, and involved in interfaith things both in Shrewsbury and also in South Shropshire. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. As Harriet mentioned, I'm Yogesh Joshi from Watford. I'm going to go first and then Simon is going to follow me. Okay, that's what we have agreed. Interfaith Week in 2020 was from Sunday 8th November to 15th November. So it was in early October that Jeremy Riddell, dialogue officer of the Humanist UK, contacted me with a reference from Ashley Beck at Interfaith Faith Network about being a potential buddy with a humanist. I was familiar with the buddy scheme because of my work. Actually, at work, we have some kind of a buddy scheme, especially actually when somebody new comes to the department. There will be a senior person actually kind of matched up as to be a buddy for a new person in terms of making that new person's life easy and sort of work through, become familiar with the processes actually related to work, etc. At least so, and there are some other schemes actually which are similar in work at least. So I was familiar and thinking that this would be a wonderful opportunity for me to learn more about humanism actually, as I was aware a little bit, but I wasn't actually I didn't have a proper detailed knowledge about humanism. So I immediately agreed that I would be happy to be a buddy. So I was put in touch by Jeremy with Simon Nightingale, a humanist and a part of Shrewsbury Interfaith Forum. We made initial contact in October 2020, and then Simon and I had regular weekly meetings in November and December of 2020 to have a discussion on a number of topics relating to Hinduism, humanism, and then it actually expanded into religion in general. quite often we would end up having a discussion on Hinduism or humanism with a scientific approach, as there are lots of practices, especially in Hinduism, based on that scientific approach. Actually, for example, fortnightly fasting. Today is one of those days. Actually, it's associated with auspicious day, what we call Agyaras, 11th day in a lunar calendar of Indian month. And every fortnight you would fast actually to give your digestive system rest, etc. But the sages that be of Hinduism brought in the spiritual and the religious aspect actually to make people follow more with a discipline. So these are the kind of topics, and there are others we discussed as well. We both found actually and agreed that whilst I, as a Hindu, follower of Sanatan Dharma belief, and Simon as a humanist, there was a lot more common in our thinking and understanding of religious or non-religious practices and beliefs. In addition to having personal meetings to have more understanding, I also attended Shrewsbury Interfaith Forum's Interfaith Week discussion during 2020. That meeting was organized and the topic of discussion was how your belief in an afterlife affect you, how you live your life on earth now. And Simon was also invited to be a speaker at one of our regular Watford Interfaith Association's by then fortnightly prayer come discussion meetings, where Simon spoke about humanism with opportunity for everybody from Watford Interfaith Association who attended that meeting to understand more about humanism, ask questions for understanding and improve personal understanding. Our regular meetings stopped at the end of December 2020, but we have remained in touch, and Simon had kindly put me in Shrewsbury Interfaith Forum's mailing list, which helped me to attend their event in November 2021 about diversity in Judaism. So not only through the buddy scheme, I learned a lot more about humanism, but also a lot about diversity within Judaism. I think I can speak for both of us that we found the experience of becoming buddies very enlightening, as I'm sure both of us learned a lot more about each other's faiths and beliefs. And I would like to thank for this unique initiative, both the Humanist UK and Interfaith Network. Thank you, and over to Simon.
Thank you so much, Yogesh, and it's great to hear these very positive experiences. Simon, the floor is yours.
Okay, Yogesh, I mean, it was great. It was really good fun. There's a guy in the audience called Jeremy Rodell, who you know very well, who runs dialogue skills training for humanists, because there are some humanists, particularly those who've left religion rather than have always been a humanist, who are a bit aggressive in the approach to faiths. And one of the first things we teach is that get to know the person, not as a Hindu, not as an Indian. And so we did. We got to know each other. I know about his family. I know about his daughter, who's a doctor. My son's a doctor. I know that Yogesh, his father was from Mumbai and went to Uganda. My father was from London, went to Malaya. We were both brought up in foreign countries. For political reasons, we both came back. He's a scientist. He's an electrical engineer. I'm a scientist. I'm a doctor. We're both a little bit particular in the sense that we like things to be correct. Some people call this pedantry, but I just think it means trying to get things right. But we both also have a strong sense of the spiritual, the transcendental. So really, with all these things in common, it was a sort of marriage made in heaven. And we got on really very well indeed. And once we'd established a friendship, I don't think there were any bars to questions. I learnt early on what Hinduism really meant to Yogesh, not just what it says in the books and so on. He told me about the importance of Atman, his sense of spirit, and karma and dharma and moksha and the other terms. Not just the definitions, but what they really meant in his life. And he talked about the way he led a good Hindu life in thought and in action, and how it was a steadying and grounding influence in his life. I mean, you know, what's not to like? I also learned that, like many religions, there's a huge diversity among Hinduism, not just the different sects and so on, and variations with geography, but also in how much it incorporates modern thinking. So, for example, I remember talking about the wonderful story of Ganesh and how he was created in rather strange circumstances, and then his head was cut off, and then it was replaced with the head of an elephant. It's an extraordinary story. And we talked about whether this was literally true, rather like Christians might believe in young earth creationism from Genesis, and how much people thought it might be a metaphor or a parable to learn important truths about the human condition. And it's quite clear there's a diversity there. And also we talked about Vedic astrology, which is quite a big thing. I mean, it's very common on a sort of informal basis. People sometimes choose names of their children based on, where and when they were born. But some also use it to govern their behavior in their life. And there is actually now in some Indian universities academic departments of astrology, which has caused some disturbance among the more regular scientists in India and abroad. And again, this is something we were able to discuss and recognize that there are a variety of different attitudes and approaches across Hinduism. I think
you have 1 minute, Simon, so we can allow a question or two to you.
Yes, okay.
That's okay.
One other great truth that Jeremy Riddell taught me is that don't make assumptions about people. You think you know them because they say they're a Hindu, but there's incredible variety about what people believe and the way it affects their life. And I've learned a lot in training for interfaith dialogue, and it's something I think that other faiths could possibly do to encourage those who aren't naturally empathic or interested in other people to approach it in a more fruitful way.
Thank you both so much. And you're both happy to respond to 1 or 2 questions, are you? Super. So we have, actually, do we have any hands raised at the moment?
Currently, no. There's a comment in the Q&A that relates to the previous presentation.
I'll come back to that at the end.
Yeah.
Is Timothy from Southampton still with us? I'd like to come back to a question he asked earlier, if he's still present. Timothy, are you there? No. Well, we will pick up on this later. Let me ask a question, if I may. You picked up at one point, there was a reflection on how this was very different from the kind of temperature of debate between humanists and those of particular religious traditions, where there may be a slightly, I suppose, a more robust tone, particularly, I think, when people have left a religion. Do you feel that there is room for robust discussion in dialogue? We've had discussion, I think, earlier on, Jeremy talked about some of the more challenging things that can arise, Jacobson. But in fact, did you find within your good-tempered and very positive engagement that there was room for really robust disagreement? And if so, how did you make that work? It sounds as if you may have been immensely gentlemanly on every front, but did you find things that were really tough, or where you actually found the temperature rising slightly on particular topics? And if so, how did you handle that?
Okay, so yes, we disagreed about things, and we were quite explicit where we disagreed, but we were respectful about the areas of our disagreement. And I don't think there was anything off limits, was there, Yogesh?
No, not at all. Obviously, I think one of the area we Hindus obviously believe quite profoundly on the sort of aspect of reincarnation, birth and death cycle. And obviously, Simon, coming as a humanist, obviously, this is your life. This is the life you are living in. Okay, so obviously, these are the kind of areas we had discussion, but then at the end, obviously, we respected each other's views.
Thank you. And I think we have Reynold Rosenberg has his hand raised, I think, and Timothy is back in. So Reynold first. Reynold Rosenberg.
Apologies, I just need to promote him to be able to speak. There we are. Reynold, you should be now able to unmute yourself.
And it's going to be a very brief question because we're just a minute or two behind time. But Reynold, if you'd like to ask it, fire away.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Firstly, this is fascinating. There's a couple of things that intrigue me about this kind of thing. Firstly, how expert would you expect to be on your religion or beliefs, given that you are actually representing, in Yogesh's case, all of the Hindu faiths, and in Simon, all of the beliefs of all of the...
Reynold, I fear we may begin to only allow you that one question. Is that okay?
All right.
Is that all right?
Let me just say that I'm quite confident.
You have to be.
I'm quite confident to talk about humanism. It isn't that complicated. Hinduism is a lot more complicated, but Yogesh has lived as a Hindu all his life, knows a huge amount about it. And he also gave me references. He gave me an online copy of this extraordinary book written in 1916 at the University of Benares about Hinduism. And it was a wonderful analysis and much better than Wikipedia. So yeah, we swapped information, but it's not that difficult, I think, to talk about your own faith.
As I say, thank you very much for your kind words, Simon. But obviously, while I'm a Hindu, I'm not the expert. Obviously, it's my lived experiences and what I've learned through my teachers and through readings and etc. So, but if I didn't know anything, actually, I would just say, I'll come back to you with my answers, actually with more clarification the following week when we were going to meet next week. Okay, so if there was obviously something I wasn't sure about, rather than actually just giving a vague answer, I would say, let me actually look into it. I'll do some more research myself, and then I'll get back to Simon. So that's how we worked on.
Thank you both so much. And Reynold, if you'd like to pop your other question in the Q&A, we may have time to come back to it. Always good to hear from you. And Timothy, I think we've picked up in some respects your questions at the beginning. Am I right that we've covered those more or less? Your 30-second input here from you, and then we need to move on. The bus will roll on to Scotland. Yep. So Timothy, your last in.
You have covered it, but you haven't covered the sort of second part of my question, which probably fell by the wayside, which was that very often dialogue becomes a discussion of trivialities and platitudes, and actually doesn't go to the center of what makes us passionate about our particular faith. I've sent an article by Rabbi Eric Joffe about this to your website. There's a certain frustration, I think, that I feel about the discussions so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. I think you've raised a question which is much broader, and I'm going to ask Maureen to pick that up in her presentation because it's a topic on which she's reflected before. Maureen, would you be kind enough to pick up that question again, and also the general point about going into the more challenging areas that others have raised? I'd like to thank very warmly Yogesh and Simon for another excellent input to this discussion. We hope you'll stay with us for the remainder, and thank you again. And now we come to our final formal input, which is from Interfaith Scotland. We're delighted to welcome its director, Dr. Maureen Sire.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm clear. Good. It's lovely to be here with you. And it's been honestly such a joy to listen to all the different presentations and just the impact of such a simple scheme as an interfaith buddy scheme. And I want to personally thank the UK Interfaith Network, because we really picked up on the idea from them too, as I sort of gathered from everyone else that the support of the Interfaith Network going forward with your local interfaith buddy schemes has been really invaluable. And we also really value that support as well. And so I want to just start by saying in 2018, the Scottish Government actually developed a strategy, and it was a strategy for tackling loneliness and isolation. And that strategy was launched in December 2018. And who would have thought that actually a year and a half later would be right bang in the, at the beginning of a global pandemic, where people found themselves in a situation where, through no fault of their own, they could quite often be very lonely and very isolated. We have staff members who don't have brothers and sisters, and whose had passed away and were living in complete and utter isolation. And so particularly that staff member, Frances, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, picked up on the idea of the interfaith buddy scheme and said that could this be something that we would really run with? Because I think it would be an excellent way to just help in some way tackle loneliness and isolation during this pandemic. And so we did. So I'm really sorry that Frances and Aparna, who really ran with this scheme, are actually being interfaith buddies at the moment together in India. So, you know, Frances is from the Christian faith and Aparna is a Hindu, and they've become very, very real buddies and through the work context. And so Frances has actually taken a short sabbatical and is with Aparna right now in India. So I thought that was really just nice to share, to be able to share that with you. So yeah, we ran with our Interfaith Buddy scheme, and it was all online. All of it so far has been online because of the pandemic. But I was just looking back over our recent funding application to the Scottish Government, and I noticed that we did put in there that, yeah, we'll continue with the Interfaith Buddy scheme online, but we will also develop a process for having an in-person Interfaith Buddy scheme, which is quite interesting because we're a national organisation, so I haven't quite 100% worked out how we're going to do that. It was much simpler to do it in a way when it was online. And I was looking at, what did I say to the Scottish Government about the importance of this Interfaith Buddy scheme? And I noticed there was three key points that were mentioned. One was it assists people with better mental health when you've got someone to talk to. And I mean, I think mental health is just, or poor mental health is just such a huge problem, not just in the UK, but actually globally. And so, for example, in the strategy with the Scottish Government, 1 in 10 people said that they quite regularly experience extreme loneliness, which is really, really sad to hear. That was, you know, in Scotland, that so 1 in 10, a tenth of the population experience loneliness and isolation. So one was by having someone to connect with, you could have better mental health. That really, and there was a lot of evidence to say that that connection helped us develop better mental health. And then learning intimately about a faith other than your own, or a belief other than your own, in an intimate setting, had an educational role as well. So health was one, education was another. And then we actually put in that it also strengthens community resilience. You know, when you actually are connected with someone from other faith traditions than your own, you learn about the role that that faith community plays in your wider community, in the wider context of Scotland. So we still have to do the in-person one. So watch this space. We might be able to report back to you as to how the in-person engagement goes. The online engagement, the faith communities that took part were very, very wide-ranging. So a variety of Christians, Latter-day Saints, Baha'i, pagan, atheist, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, and lots of varieties of those. And we averaged about 24 people at the dialogues. We did a lot of planning beforehand. So we'd ask people to register and to let us know what faith tradition they were in. And if they had, I think many people have mentioned this, if there was a faith tradition that they particularly wanted to learn about, or if they were just happy to engage with someone from another faith tradition. So we would carefully match people up. And the wonderful thing, all of you'll know this about Zoom, is that you can put people into separate rooms so that you're immediately in a room with your dialogue partner, with your interfaith buddy. We did all the things that other people have mentioned. We talked through safety, online safety. They had the guidance beforehand. All of these things are just, professional way to do it. And then people were put into their separate rooms. Occasionally that was challenging because sometimes people would sign up and say, yes, I really want to speak to a Muslim or a Sikh or a Hindu or whatever. And then they wouldn't turn up to the, they wouldn't come into the Zoom. So you were left with one person. You're thinking, oh, who are we going to put them with? We're very blessed at having a diverse staff team. So we always had plan B. If we're left with uneven numbers, one of the staff members would go into the dialogue room, into the interfaith buddies room with the person that wasn't, that didn't have a partner. So there was never anyone left without a partner. we've done it quite a number of times now online, and we're finding people returning. And we also said to people that it's up to them in their space, whether they want to take the dialogue, forward, whether they want to meet each other regularly online, if they want to phone, if they want to meet in person and go for walks, whatever. That was left to the people in their interface buddy space together to make those decisions. We didn't have it, do any planning or organizing around that. And I believe some have taken that forward and developed, long-term friendships. We'd also find that new people would come quite often to the buddy scheme, so that we were also reaching out to people that we didn't know. So when we sent out our media, our social media, and our invitations, we'd send it to all our members, our associate members, our friends, to our local interfaith group networks, right across the whole of Scotland. So there was a good mix of people from lots of different geographical places. We didn't encounter any problems. There was only one in all the different interfaith buddies schemes that we did. There was only once that one person got in touch and said it was quite a nice experience, but we found that we didn't have much in common. So I suppose occasionally that is going to happen, and that we didn't really know what to say to each other. But that was one out of, just so many. So I don't know if
I
there's
just do a
anything...
time check, Maureen, on whether, if you're wanting to show any video clip, you may need to do that.
Okay,
very
well,
swiftly now, I think. Otherwise, you have got a couple of minutes still left to speak. But
well, I think of the video clip, is rather nice. It's a Muslim and a Christian, and it's the chair of Interfaith Scotland, Lindsay, and Reverend Gill, and I just think it might be a really nice one to end on. So if Ashley's okay, I've sent it to Ashley already, if he doesn't mind, to share just that little clip from Lindsay and Reverend Gill.
Thank you. I will just set that up.
And this was for our part of our World Interfaith Harmony. You can see the whole video online if you like.
Right.
Beautiful talking to the Reverend Peter today. It was really moving, actually. I feel a bit emotional about it because, like Susan said there, what we found was that religion's about love. It's about the love of God. It's about the love of each other. It's about the love of family. And it was really beautiful to talk to Peter about the hardships that he'd been through actually back in Pakistan, and how difficult it'd been, but how he overcame that in so many ways, and still carried on with his faith and actually became more devout. But along with that, actually, he really embraced interfaith. He talks about a train journey that he'd taken through Pakistan, that he organized with 500 other believers of all different faiths, and how they'd really faced horrendous hardship and horrendous persecution, but he kept it going. He took ownership of that journey and took it through Pakistan, and even though it'd been really difficult, actually, he found along the way that the everyday person who was just living their life there and in the cities and in the villages and in the countryside that he was going through, they embraced them. They were really pleased to see them, and they were really welcoming, and that really helped affirm his faith, and that was beautiful. So yeah, I loved it, and I really hope that Peter and I can carry on these conversations, because I would love to know more about the amazing work that he's doing in Paisley, and the interfaith that he's doing, and amazing work that he's doing with his parishioners and with his family. And it was just really beautiful and really moving. Thanks, Peter.
Yes, I have a similar feeling. It was just like a fast dating experience, how to get to know each other in a short period of time. So Lindsay is a lovely sister, beautiful smile, and it's contagious. She was smiling throughout her conversation, and she shared how she was brought up in a kind of a very interfaith kind of situation, family. Her parents, one was spiritualist, other was atheist, and then in the extended family, aunt was interfaith minister, and they have different kind of faith in, as she have seen, but she still wasn't practicing any faith until she met a wonderful, handsome looking young man, who really won her heart. And his name was Ayub, and he also shared about the story of Job. And Job was so much persecuted and also gone through hardship and difficulties, and yet he was loving even those insects that was on his body, was hurting him, harming him, and would put it back on his body when they were fallen. And we have also same kind of values, and how faith has changed her. What a blessing to have this kind of conversation with Sister Lindsay Taylor, and I hope to keep in touch and would invite each other to our events and things like that. So it was really, I think, we're going to carry on our friendship, our buddiness. You have brought us together, so thanks to Interfaith, Scottish Interfaith, as you, Lindsay. It was a blessing talking to you. God bless you.
I thought that was rather a nice one to perhaps end on. It's just, it kind of captures a lot of the emotion of the Interfaith Buddy scheme, I think.
Maureen, everybody has had a chance to answer, respond to at least one question. Is there somebody out there who has a burning question that they would like to ask Maureen after her excellent presentation about the Scotland experience? Ashley, are we?
So no hands up just yet.
No. Well, in that case, I think I would like to use just the last couple of minutes of the webinar to offer some closing reflections, if you could put me back in speaker mode. There we are. So thank you again. To everybody who's presented today. There are so many different kinds of experience from the Interfaith Buddies scheme that we could have shared, and every one of you who've contributed today or asked questions could have said so much more. The kind of questions that have been coming up in the Q&A and in some of the raised hand questions are about practicalities. And these practicalities are to some extent addressed in the material that you'll find on the Interfaith Week and Interfaith Network websites, which is quite careful guidance. And when you look at that, you may think, oh, this is a bit kind of, this is a little bit detailed. It's detailed up to a point and for a reason, and it is exactly the kind of things that people have been raising. We want to help people create spaces for conversation that feel safe and well organized and have proper regard for things like the dreaded GDPR and data protection, safeguarding, and many other things. But putting to get people together, finding the right people, making the experience work does call for good people at local level or in national organizations to take charge of helping arrange that experience. And that is time consuming. It is something that has to be done carefully. But the positives, I think, outweigh the challenges enormously. There's such an absence of chances for people to learn more about each other's lives, experiences, their faith, their non-religious beliefs. And this is a real contributor to what's sometimes called religious literacy or religion and belief literacy. It's also about building friendships and building local connections. So I thank once again everybody who's contributed so interestingly and so well to today's webinar. And we will be also picking up some of the really important suggestions that have been made in the course of discussion today. We are at 1:15 exactly at the moment. And unless there is any burning points that people have on the panel feel that they've not been able to make, I would like to draw us to close on time. So no signs of that. I'm going to just thank you all again incredibly warmly, and thank you to everybody who's been present today. Please be in touch with the Interfaith Network or with Interfaith Scotland, and we will be very pleased to put you in touch with people as best we can. Thank you again.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, well all. Bye-bye.